Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of The Law Life with me, your host, Mike. Now, being in the field of law, I find that a lot of my family members, friends, and anyone really that I know tends to bring up quite a bit. I've had quite a few conversations with family members and friends, and I found out that actually a lot of people generally have quite large misconceptions about laws that exist in the UK and just our legal system themselves. The UK being quite old in terms of its legal system, it can come up with quite obscure laws that people don't know if they should believe or don't know if they still exist, for example. Now, of course, why would they? Not everyone like you or I has spent thousands of hours with their head buried in a textbook trying to memorize and soak up every single detail they possibly can. By the way, my advice, not legal advice, is that it's never really a good idea to do it that way. It never worked for me. It might work for you, but it definitely never worked for me. So always keep your mind open. Now, whilst you're watching this video, please give a like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up so we know you've enjoyed it, and get to thinking for yourself if there are any weird laws that you've heard, and maybe write them down in the comment section so I can discuss them with you in a follow-up video at a later time, as I find things like this actually very, very interesting. I like the fact that we can mix in a bit of humour, obscurity, and the law. That's one of my favourite aspects of the law, is its history. So, without further ado, we'll get into the legal myths that are commonly believed in the UK, and here's the first one. The first legal myth that actually I find extremely funny is the idea that it's illegal to die in Parliament. Yes, you heard me right. Illegal to time your death in Parliament. Now, this belief comes from the claim that actually anyone who dies in Parliament is legally entitled to a state funeral. Now, that may be true. It is, in fact, a truth that if you are to die in Parliament, it's you're in essence dying serving your country to a certain extent. So you are entitled to a state funeral, and that has happened twice in the past. I will get to that in a moment though. The reason why it became illegal or banned is because in order to avoid the costs of associated with a state funeral, they decided that the best idea was to essentially outlaw or ban anyone from dying in Parliament as to avoid those costs. The first part of that myth, which is true, however untrue to a certain extent, is that it wouldn't actually be that expensive. It would probably cost, for the biggest state funeral, something, for example, like Margaret Thatcher's or Princess Diana's, where you have policing and security costs involved. That would be anywhere between 3 to 5 million Great British pounds, which is approximately the same price that it would cost to run a state school for an entire year. Now, that is expensive. However, for a normal MP, which probably you and I can't name a lot of them, I mean, there are 600 or so seats in Parliament, we probably couldn't name many of them at all, could we? Let's be honest. Those costs wouldn't be as high. Security risks wouldn't be in that red zone, you know? So, as I mentioned before, people have died in Parliament. It's happened, actually 4 people have died in Parliament, 2 of which were MPs, and the other 2 were actually executed as a result of them being involved in the gunpowder plot. For those of you who are listening maybe from outside of the UK, the gunpowder plot was essentially a plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and that's why we celebrate the foiling of that plot every November on the 5th with something we call Bonfire Night, or commonly referred to as Guy Fawkes Night. So anyway, that's a myth. Although it's not really illegal to die in Parliament. Although at one point it was banned, it's still a myth. No one can time their death, right? That's quite morbid, but that's the truth, isn't it? So the second one, which I find rather disturbing, funny at the same time that anyone could possibly believe this, is that it's legal to murder a Welshman or a Scotsman provided the circumstances are sufficiently unlikely, in those very specific words. Now, it's commonly regurgitated as the myth that it's legal to murder a Welshman with a crossbow fired from the city walls of Chester, or sometimes it's changed so that it's legal for for somebody to murder a Scotsman within the city walls of York. Now, firstly, city walls no longer exist, so you can understand that that is an old law, or an old myth, rather. Thankfully, for you Scots and Welshmen out there, it's totally untrue. Murder is illegal, no matter what the circumstances are. Murder is murder. It's outlawed in the UK and in every country for that matter. So, due to the fact that Scotland and England were at war for quite a while, the myth comes from the fact that at some point it would have been perfectly acceptable to murder or to kill an enemy combatant. So, an enemy combatant being an enemy of the crown, a Scotsman, for example, at times of war. Of course, that is no longer the case. And as the UK is a signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights, as every European nation or European Union nation is, despite the fact that we are exiting the European Union, the European Convention of Human Rights states that everyone's right to life shall be protected by law. That is a law that we already have in the UK. However, it's also underwritten and it doesn't need to be said. It's a given that this law or this perceived law is a myth. Thankfully, right? So the third one, now this came as quite a shock to me actually. When I was researching this is something that I found out that I actually never knew despite my studies, but I find it very interesting. It's the idea that it's illegal to damage an image of the Queen. Now, I'll go into a bit more depth on this one, but it's normally spoken about with regards to, for example, putting a stamp on a letter upside down, or doodling on a banknote, maybe giving the Queen a mustache, for example. It's said that amounts to treason and is therefore punishable by death. Now, if you go back to what I said before, punishable by death, that's illegal in the UK. The death sentence was outlawed in 1998. And again, we are still signatories to the European Convention of Human Rights, which would prevent us from ever bringing that law back, which, if you ask me, is a good thing, and everyone has their own opinion. However, especially for treason, or doodling on a banknote, for example. Now, firstly, I would like to point out that actually it is illegal, however, to deface a banknote. That's not because it carries a picture of the Queen. That's because it's legal tender, it's currency. But the fine is only £200. There's no death or imprisonment, nothing like that. You're not going to be arrested for doodling on a banknote. You're not going to be put to death, for sure. However, I would like to point out, very interestingly, that it is not in any way illegal to completely destroy a banknote. If you were to burn it, shred it, simply rip it up and throw it in the bin, it destroys its value and it's removed from circulation. So that actually is not outlawed. That's perfectly legal. But why would you want to do that? Unless you're sitting there and you have enough money to do so, feel free to do so, but you won't catch me destroying my own banknotes anytime soon. So the fourth law, or the fourth misconception that I'd like to address, actually, it's so commonly misconceived that if you were to ask anyone in any employer or employee, they probably regurgitate it to you quite well, believing it's the truth. The idea that it's illegal to give someone a bad reference. Now, this isn't true. Not at all, actually. But your reference has to be true and accurate. You can't simply give a bad reference because you don't like someone. You cannot do. There are defamation laws that can open employees up to lawsuits if that is the case. So, for example, if actually you had a good employee that you simply just didn't get on with, and you were to write something extremely negative that would prevent them from getting another job or subsequently ruin their reputation, then that opens you up to a defamation lawsuit, and that can cost employers a lot of money. It is against the law, and I would never recommend it. However, it's not illegal to portray negativity in a reference if it's true. So if you do have an employee who's negligent, lazy, shows no interest in his work, and you happen to mention those in a non-malicious manner in a reference, that's perfectly legal. Perfectly legal. So that's actually a very important one, because although the misconception of the law provides employees with more stability, with a safer work environment, or ability to gain a new job, in fact, the defamation laws are there to do that. So it must be truthful. Yes, sorry, I struggled to get my words out there. Lastly, well, no, actually not lastly. I have a few more that I'd like to talk to you about. I think they're hilarious. We have a couple more, so stay with me. Lastly, we're going to talk about criminal cases, but on this note, we're going to talk about pregnancy. More specifically, the idea that it's legal for a pregnant woman to relieve themselves in a policeman's helmet. You've all heard it. If you're sitting there and you haven't heard it, you're lying to me. You've all heard it. This is probably one of the most common myths there is in the UK, but it has no foundation in fact whatsoever. It's not true. In 1986, the Public Order Act was enacted, which means that essentially public urination, it wasn't pertaining only to public urination, it was essentially to do with public disorder in general. However, it made urination in public punishable with a fine. As you know, urinating in public is not legal, never do it. We've all been caught short somehow, try and find a way around it. But due to the fact that pregnant women do need to urinate more often, it's simple biology, guys. Although the Public Order Act does not have a specific exemption for pregnant women, officers do have a discretion to not charge them. So we're all humans, we're all compassionate, we all understand everyone else's situations. If a pregnant woman is caught short in public, the policeman does not have to, is not obliged to charge her. They have discretion as to choose whether they do or not, which is a good thing. That means laws that it doesn't fetter their discretion, essentially, which is a fantastic thing. However, for a policeman to offer up his helmet for the pregnant lady, it's probably above and beyond. I think you'd all agree that is far above and beyond what is required. So yes, that is a myth. That is a myth that even I was surprised to find out. Now, the last two are to do with criminal law. They're not applicable to everyone, but this is a very, very important one, actually. The idea that someone cannot be convicted on circumstantial evidence. That's a myth. So, in a criminal trial, the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. So no reasonable person could have a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. So if there is any doubt that the defendant is innocent or guilty, or if there is any doubt that the defendant is innocent, they are to be found not guilty. There has to be no doubt from a reasonable perspective. Now, cases that are brought in court against someone who's been charged with a crime can be built on direct or circumstantial evidence, or a combination of them both. Now, direct evidence would be, for example, a witness statement. Somebody saw you do something, CCTV cameras, actual hard evidence and proof. Now, circumstantial evidence is indirect evidence that may lead to the inference in a courtroom, for example, that the defendant committed a crime. Inference is the key word, even in the absence of direct proof. So, interestingly enough, DNA evidence being one of the most important aspects of a criminal case, or one of the hardest proofs that somebody committed a crime, is actually circumstantial. It's actually circumstantial. It cannot prove necessarily that they committed the crime. It can only prove that they were there or they were present. However, that can lead to an inference in a courtroom and sway a jury into of right-minded people, jury of the defendant's peers, into inferring that he is guilty or he or she is guilty of that crime. So this includes, like I said, DNA evidence. Does not mean they committed the crime, but it can be inferred as such. So that shows you that actually a criminal or somebody accused of a crime can in fact be convicted on circumstantial evidence alone if that is all that is offered. As long as you are able to infer that the crime was committed, as long as the case with circumstantial evidence is strong, yes, they can be convicted on purely circumstantial evidence. Now, the last one, now this is an interesting one because there's a huge contrast between what I'm about to tell you and the laws in the United States. Now, they don't affect us, but if you're watching this and you are in the US, this does not apply to you, and I'll explain to you what it is in a second. This leads to the myth that turns out to be true. The idea that police officers cannot lie to you is a common myth in the US. So in the US, police officers can in fact lie to you. They can lie to you to get information in an interview, during interrogation. They are allowed to lie to you. And it's a common myth that they can't. Now, in the UK, however, the fact is that police officers really can't lie to you. In fact, any evidence in the UK that is obtained through a lie told by the police is inadmissible in court. It's totally invalid. The law does not let police in any way lie to a suspect under any circumstances. Therefore, this is the myth that turned out to be true. The reason I call it a myth is because, let's be honest, if we're watching TV, 99% of the time it's going to be an American show, especially a crime drama or a documentary. So this is why it's a myth for us, because actually in the UK, that law does not exist. That it was created through common law in the US, not through statute. That common law has never been created in the UK. That case has never been brought to trial in the UK. Therefore, police officers in our nation cannot lie to us. So that got a bit serious. Those last two are quite serious and they're quite interesting to know that. I find them very interesting and I'm sure you will too. So that's it for this episode. That's it for this time round of myths that you thought to be true. So there are plenty of myths, Masters Laws, especially here in the UK, since we have such an old legal system. These are just a few of them, and I can't wait to share even more with you in further episodes or even in the comment section. Give me a shout. So if you didn't know, now you know. And I'd like to be able to take this opportunity to let you all know that this is not legal advice. Nothing I show you on this channel is legal advice. Please don't take it as such. I am simply giving you fun and interesting information without any advice whatsoever. So once again, if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe so you don't miss any new content when it pops up, and leave a comment with anything you'd like to see in the future, any questions, anything you're interested about, anything you'd like to know about, and I'll include it. I'll do my best to include it in a future video. It's been an absolute pleasure, my fellow law lifers. It's been a pleasure seeing you. It's been a pleasure being able to inform you, and thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Law Life, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.